Back when PlayStation was interested in more than just third-person action games, Twisted Metal was a slightly more fast-paced third-person car combat action game that only really had competition with Cell Damage, and you've probably never even heard of that game before, so you can guess who won that fight. Having never played one myself, I didn't know anything outside of this creepy guy, and that's pretty much it. But spoilers for the review, I guess. I really liked it, so I started looking more into the characters, but I'll save that for the end. Let's talk about Twisted Metal. Now, the only reason I even decided to watch Twisted Metal is because I'm what you may call an Anthony Mackie aficionado. And who wouldn't be with such a prolific actor? From playing real-life dickhead in Pain and Gain to fictional good guy in the MCU, you gotta respect his chops. And then there's just all of his funny faces, so when I heard he was in Twisted Metal, I was like, sure, I'll check it out. How bad could it be? Now, let's start with the story. The first episode is a really great first impression to me. It starts with some interesting exposition, good action, has some decent jokes, and even though I tend to always just like post-apocalyptic stuff anyway, I think the walled-off cities with badlands between them is a cool idea. I like that we get to see a lot of the world because of Mackie's character, John, and while I do think overall it kinda lacks in saying where the government is, or how or why the bug that took out the internet and computers happened, or why I wasn't cast as Neve Campbell's husband in this scene. The questions I wanted to know weren't answered, but I think because this show doesn't take itself too seriously, there's a lot of hand-waving going around, and if you take the show where this scene happened seriously, that's kinda on you. I do think it's kinda weird to only get background on 2 of the characters before the fall. I mean, technically we get 3, but this old lady is only in 1 episode, so who cares? I think seeing more of Quiet's life could have been interesting, but I also think the reason that we don't get too much info is because even though Mackie and Stephanie Beatrice are in their 40s, they're playing characters in their early to mid-30s max, since Mackie's character is like, I don't know, 10 or something when the fall happens, and he says that happened 20 years ago in the first episode, and given that he is an amnesiac and Quiet would have been pretty young too, the backstories probably wouldn't have been as eventful as Thomas Hayden Church's character, Agent Stone. But the things that they do show, the weird little factions, the moving city, and a bunch of 18-wheelers, Gallagher, but with a dick this time. That's a reference for my 45-plussers in the crowd who watch my childish ramblings for some reason. Love ya. Like I was saying, the things that they do take the time to show off are really interesting to me, and while I do wish we did actually get to see inside of New Chicago, I'm always excited when the greatest city on earth is mentioned. I think there's enough mystery to not only the characters, but the world to keep interest, even without Anthony Mackie commentary over the boring parts. I think it sets up the next season well, even though I don't really like that this entire season is just a build up to the tournament, but I get that they were trying to make John and Quiet more fleshed out characters, and if they just met in the tournament when they're just trying to kill each other, I can see how that would be difficult. But this show is a comedy, so even with all that talk about world building and character progression, if it's not funny, it kinda sucks as a show. Luckily for me, it is very funny at times. Now, it's not like it's laugh out loud funny or they're telling jokes, and most of the comedy comes from the weirder characters like Preacher or Sweet Tooth, but there's a lot of funny moments between John and Quiet too, where you can see their relationship growing. Also, there's just some really good Mackie faces in this, and that's really all I can ask for. Overall, I like the story enough to look more into the world and its characters outside of the show, and for an adaptation, I feel like that's kind of the point. With all that said about the story, it was the character work in this show that really kept me watching. Now, Anthony Mackie is the best part of the show, and like, yeah, I'm biased, but this is also just a very good character for Mackie to play. John Doe is an annoying motor mouth, which is what I think Mackie does best. Sure, he's good in roles where he's more dramatic, like when him and his best friend fuck in a video game, but when Mackie can riff and be silly, that's the Mackie I like to see. I didn't want to see Mackie cheeks, but they decided it was important to his character for some reason. But aside from that, anytime he's on screen, I think you're gonna have a good time if you like someone who can't shut up and who looks like they're just having a grand old time. For the most part, I guess. But like I mentioned, John is an amnesiac, so he really can't remember anything that happened before the Great Wallening. But I think that sets up an interesting dynamic between him and Quiet, which brings up Quiet, played by Stephanie Beatrice. I like Quiet a lot.
I'm not asking you for a week, I'm not asking you for a month, I'm not asking you for a year. Can you give me one more day?
I would like to apologize for my outburst. But what I think makes her character interesting is how different she is from John. Not just because she knows that silence is nice sometimes, but her journey over the 10 days is kind of the opposite of John's. For her, she just lost the most important person in her life and is on the warpath as her means of coping with that. John hasn't had anyone close to him since Bloody Mary, played by Chloe Fineman, and when you watch the show, you see how that turned out. But the show makes the point that Quiet and John's relationship is different from theirs. There's a much deeper connection, and I think that comes from them meeting in the middle. Like I said, Quiet lost her most precious thing, while John is trying to gain a precious thing to him, and I think the fact that John, for the most part, hasn't really had any meaningful relationships out in the world. That's why he is a little off, and when Quiet makes the point that he's never had a family, it hurts him. I think he finally understands when, spoilers, Evelyn is blown up, but it's a little too on the nose for me personally. I do really like their dynamic, and the relationship that they have is pretty cute too. I think it progresses a little quickly for me, but I would have folded on the first day, so I get it. Quiet is a badass though. It's one of the many things that I love about her, and I think she gets a lot of cool moments to show that off, and I'm glad that they give her those opportunities since they could have just made her a ride-along, but no, they let her get in the trenches, and I'm glad that they did. The next character is actually a twofer since he's played by two people at the same time. Sweet Tooth, voiced by Will Arnett and by Samoa Joe. Will Arnett is actually really great as Sweet Tooth's voice. He's menacing, funny, and quite obviously very disturbed, which is really all I can ask for. Joe is obviously very intimidating, but from all that wrestling, he's also very emotive with his body, and I think that really helps to sell the vocal performance. He's so light on his feet sometimes, and given his theater background in the show, I think it actually works really well. Agent Stone, or Thomas Hayden Church, who I admittedly only know as Sandman, is also very good in this. His bravado and grandstanding when he's talking to his officers feels like something a cop with a power trip would say, so all cops. He's very stern and gives off the appearance of someone who should be commended, and while he's of course a sad little man with a gun, I think it's actually really cool that they didn't go overboard with him and have him whine or throw a tantrum or something. The last character that I want to talk about is Stu, played by Mike Mitchell. The main reason that I wanted to bring him up is because I think his character works really well as a microcosm of the whole show, because when we first meet him, he's trading in one devil for the other. Then he does the same when he switches to riding with Sweet Tooth, and then again when he betrays him, since Sweet Tooth is obviously going to come back in some way. I don't know if there's any magic in the Twisted Metal universe, but if there is, I'm sure they'll bring it up in season 2. But back to Stu. Every time he's on screen, it seems like he just wants to scream, "I'm not supposed to be here!" And he keeps getting in relationships that completely upend his life. The same goes for Quiet, John, and even Sweet Tooth to a degree. Characters are linked together through their choices and relationships in a way that more often than not actually end them up in a worse spot than they were in before. John seemed fine being a milkman before. Sure, he has the trauma of not knowing where he comes from and the whole everyone wants to kill him thing, but because of his relationship with both Quiet and Raven, he's lost everything that means anything to him. Quiet's gone, Evelyn's gone, and even his dream of living on the inside. Quiet's also lost what seems to be the only person she's loved, not including her brother, and she's not only back to square one of her being on her own, but now, since she's been out with John, she's wrapped up in his family issues too. Seems like his sister could have easily found him if she found Quiet, but you know, it's best not to think too hard about the show where a guy wants to fuck his car. Not John, a different character, just FYI. And then there's Sweet Tooth, and sure, he was always going to be in a difficult spot because of, you know, his disposition, but because he brought Stu around, he's dead now. Well, maybe. Probably not though. Editor PR here. While editing this, I found out that the last episode has an end credit scene, which I didn't know because none of the other episodes did, so of course I didn't wait till the end of the credits, and Sweet Tooth is back for some reason. So yeah, back to the script. It'll be interesting to see if the characters lose more things because of who they know, and if there'll be any time to make new relationships when they're all shooting at each other in the tournament. Now, really quickly, before I talk about what I think could happen in season 2, I want to talk about the different effects in the show because I have some really good things to say and some not so good things to say. For the stunts and practical effects, I think the show really shines. The explosions are all really well done, the car combat feels fast but still has the weight that it should of a demolition derby, and when things finally pop off in the last episode, I think it has a good culmination of all the vehicular violence we've seen so far. The visual effects and CGI, however, usually are not very good. Luckily, they don't actually use them that much throughout the show, but when it is used, it's usually very distracting, like this seal or this blood or this giant wall of cars that I actually think looks pretty good from far away, but then when they get close, oh man. Honestly, this is the biggest thing that I would like to see improved for the next season, aside from more world building, but you know how it is. Okay, so this is where I actually started to look some stuff up for the characters and world. I only did a little research because I just couldn't believe that they'd kill off the most iconic character in the franchise, so I had to do a little digging.
6.5 hours later.
Okay. So, The Twisted in Twisted Metal is more than just a fun little title because the franchise is both very fucked up but also intertwined and kind of just all over the place. The show is much more grounded than the soupy timeline of events that the games seem to have. Like, in the games, there's talk of parallel dimensions, ghosts, supernatural deals with unscrupulous spirits, a cop surviving in the vacuum of space for a year trapped in just his cop car with nothing else, and a dude's face being stretched over the planet. There's just a lot going on, and it's all very wacky. And from some of the development stuff I found out about, they didn't really seem to have a plan for a linear timeline, so I don't think the stories of the games are really going to be that helpful in nailing down what's going to happen next. The show does take a lot of inspiration from Twisted Metal Black, from what I found out, with a lot of the characters being taken from that game, like John Doe, Agent Stone, and Preacher, but they've also done a lot to change the characters to fit the story that they're trying to tell here. Unless they pivot very hard to damn near being a horror show for season 2, I don't think most of the things from Black are going to be recreated. But I am interested to see how they're going to pull off this guy, because they tease him at the end, but this guy is going to be either the funniest or stupidest character I've ever seen in a TV show, and I can't wait. Going through it, there seems to be both a lot of lore that they could use while somehow simultaneously nothing, since these characters don't really interact that much outside of shooting at each other. It's like if they tried to make a show out of the skins in Fortnite or something. The first season did a lot of cool things to get a non-Twisted Metal fan interested, and I hope the second season can go even further. Maybe when Calypso's fully revealed, he'll bring some magic in and really get crazy, or maybe we'll just keep it grounded and just have Sweet Tooth having a kid or something. Who knows? So if you don't mind some blood, some Mackie macking in the dirtiest place you could possibly think of.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Or Samoa titties, then I'd say check this one out, because I think they can drive the story for a while. Well, when they can start paying their writers and actors a living wage, but you know what I mean. And this is the section where I do the like, comment, and subscribe spiel, so you know, do that please.